let's pivot to fashion. You came from the finance world in 2018, 2017?
More or less, yeah.
And moved into the fashion world, have a focus on sustainability. Tell us a little bit about why you made that jump, and then what you found when you got into that industry.
So, it's been interesting. It's really full circle. I think people look at the finance to fashion jump, and for me, it really kind of started as a kid. I grew up in a really multidisciplinary, kind of progressive house. My dad was a technologist and a professor. My mom was an artist. So I always really liked this idea that there were kind of solutions at the intersection of disciplines. And I also grew up in kind of the Midwest and Rust Belt at a pretty tricky time, late 80s, early 90s. So I really had a sense that we needed to build a better mousetrap. So long story short, ended up 15 years in finance and emerging markets at Morgan Stanley. And I got a front row seat to really seeing the power of capital. And obviously what gets funded is what gets built. And I really felt strongly that we needed to dedicate capital to more relevant places for the future. I didn't know the first thing about fashion. I took a sabbatical in late 17, early 18, ostensibly to focus on ESG. And to use kind of a funny pun, I started to pull the string on a bunch of different industries, but when I got to fashion, I was just floored by the magnitude of the problem and the complexity of the problem. So we use in fashion about 4 times our planetary boundaries when you think about our carbon budget, our water budget, and then we throw about half of the product that we make in a given year into a landfill. And about 80% of what makes it into our closets we don't touch. So I think that's a through line of a lot of what I've been hearing already this morning is just the immense waste. And when I looked at it, I thought this is a really fascinating systems problem. And I didn't see that many kind of comprehensive visions to attack that. And so built Another Tomorrow as a brand to really be kind of a living, breathing, commercially viable case study for how we could do things differently in the industry.
So what's the process? Obviously you want to have fewer, higher quality products that don't get thrown into a landfill. How do you put that into business action?
Yeah, so the matrix for decision making is really important. You've got to have really clear filters. So we took a very science-based approach to animal, human, and environmental welfare, but really fundamentally, we needed to think about the brand as a manifestation of the system. So fashion is either made out of plastic, or it's an agricultural product, or a tiny little bit of it is made in a lab. And so knowing that we didn't want to be using plastics, we really said, okay, our North Star is going to be farm traceable, regenerative sourcing to the greatest extent possible, utilization of next generation materials, but then to your point about quality and longevity, we wanted to introduce circularity from the get-go. And so not only are the products essentially farm traceable for the vast majority of them, they also have digital IDs that can help us to facilitate many, many lives.
So you're tracking your inventory and your supply chain.
Yeah, exactly.
So you started the business, it seemed to be going well, you hit the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then, the way people dress, the way they buy, the way they shop, things changed. And in some unexpected ways. There were some upside and some downside. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so we actually launched 6 weeks before. So we were kind of more or less a pandemic baby. Wasn't in the original business plan, but that was very much kind of foundational to the business. And so I think what was amazing about the pandemic was that people really had to obviously sit at home and ingest kind of the decisions that they were making in their lives. So we saw a big wave of positive momentum around sustainability in the industry, which I thought was really fantastic. But there was also this sense that the world could just be digital. And I think that we've seen in so many different industries that pendulum has swung back pretty aggressively. I think what's fascinating about this particular moment in time, and it's messy, is that the whole kind of pre-pandemic system is breaking. And it's breaking in really interesting and problematic ways. So on the one hand, the distribution model is completely in disarray, and so fashion brands, by and large, used to actually kind of disseminate their risk by selling their product through distributors. When those distributors break, you basically take the risk back into the hands of the brand, and I think that that's going to lead to a lot of really interesting efficiencies. At the same time, a lot of the intermediation that happened in the supply chain is also starting to change because you're starting to see these producer responsibility laws. So you're going to start to see an industry that starts to, I think, look a lot more vertical than it used to, and that requires a lot more efficiency, especially around capital. So I'm excited about the moment that we're in.
And how is that affecting your business? How's your business plan changed from the 1.0 to now the 2.0?
You know, it's interesting for us, especially in our product category, you have to be able to meet the customer where they are. And so that lends itself to a really omni-channel model. What we've seen is, when things get messy in the distribution landscape, you obviously want to own more of your channels. And so we're now opening retail, but trying to do that in a very experiential way that can also, bring a lot of the impact and a lot of the education to home in ways that, digitally doesn't just totally manifest. So it's exciting.
Yeah, I think there was that move. Everybody went direct to consumer. Everybody think they didn't need an in-person experience, and then even some of those brands are opening up little shops.
Yep.
Maybe they don't carry the inventory. Maybe they'll deliver the product to your home the next day or in a couple of days. But like you can go, you can try it on, you can have some kind of retail experience.
Yep.
Have you heard success stories of brands that are doing that?
Oh, it's huge. I think this is really the direction forward, and if you can create a hybrid model, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, ultimately, by putting so much of the onus of the risk back on the brand, I think it's going to lead to really a lot of efficiencies around like pre-order, pre-production, on-demand models, which is something that we've been doing now for a couple of years, as well as this emphasis on thinking about the full kind of customer life cycle, because the beautiful thing about retail is it can also be a hub of circularity. So it's a great way for people to bring products back, to be able to shop secondhand as well. So it becomes like a very interesting nexus point that I think you just don't have people's attention in the same way digitally.
Yeah. One of the things that has happened over the last couple of years is fast fashion has really gone from like an interesting business case to like dominating the industry.
Yeah.
And it created new consumer patterns and consumer behaviors. There's been some backlash to that, but it doesn't seem like these brands are going away. These companies aren't really going away, and they're not really changing their business practices. So like, what is the solution there? Does there need to be a regulatory solution? Can we shame customers more than we already have?
I think it's regulatory. I really think it's regulatory. The economic incentives for the customer are so strong, and the complexity of the impact in fashion is so immense that I think it's really difficult to put the onus on the consumer in fashion, let alone any consumer industry. And so I think regulation is a huge part of the solution there. Culture also helps, for sure, and I think we find it's fascinating. You see the same people are buying like secondhand as are buying fast fashion to some extent. So there's a lot of mixed messages in that. And it's also, one of the reasons why I think resale is like one of the few areas that really has a strong tailwind in this industry, because it has the alignment between the economic incentive and sustainability. But yeah, in short, I don't think fast fashion is going anywhere until we really significantly regulate it, which is happening in Europe, but we're not close in the US.
And this is just making the companies responsible for the product that they produce to make sure it gets disposed of. They're in some way responsible for it. They just can't ship it overseas and bury it.
It's super complex. In a given supply chain, if you really wanted to create appropriate producer responsibility, it would be literally all the way from the raw material level through every single processing phase through to end of life. And that requires both regulation of domestic companies as well as regulation of importers. And so it's a pretty complex landscape. There's a lot of really exciting legislation, even in this country, where that's happening. But the European Union is leaps and bounds ahead.
And do you think that's probably the model we should pursue?
I think so. Yeah, I think that Europe will continue to lead, and we're starting to see the positive spillover effects of that cross-border. But that's going to be crucial.
Excellent. Vanessa, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I really appreciate it.